We are about 1 month away from the 1 year anniversary of the Taliban taking power in Kabul. A lot has happened since. A lot has not happened since that was probably expected of the Taliban regime in Afghanistan. But it is fair to say, I think, now that the regional countries and the neighbors of Afghanistan are much more directly in contact with the Taliban about regional security. The larger sort of umbrella of Western security or American security is now no more there, and is not expected to be there in the time to come. So to discuss this, we have an excellent panel covering a lot of regional countries, neighboring countries, and the neighboring regions. I'll quickly introduce the panel to everyone. We've got Mandana Teshayar, who is currently the chair of the board of directors, Iranian Peace Studies Scientific Association. We have Olga Mitrofanenkova, I hope I got that right, junior researcher at the Institute of Oriental Studies, Russian Academy of Sciences. And we, of course, have Ambassador Gautam Mukhopadhyay, who everyone is extremely familiar with on our platforms, the former Indian ambassador to Afghanistan. So just to start this conversation, what I will do is I will hand over to each of our panelists for about 6 to 8 minutes to basically paint us a picture of where they are sitting, in the capital they are sitting, how they see Afghanistan, how they see the transition of Afghanistan that has taken place over the past 1 year, and what kind of challenges do they believe are going to take place in the next 1 year. I don't want to crystal ball gaze beyond that, because I think it's a very futile exercise when it comes to Afghanistan, and with such a with the prevailing conditions in Kabul at this point in time. But it will be very interesting to see these views from Russia, from India, from Iran, of how they see this panning out from a short-term perspective for the moment, but also maybe from a long-term perspective of what the Taliban regime is, or what kind of role the Taliban regime is going to play when it comes to Afghanistan. So if I may start with Olga, if you may start with 8 minutes explaining the Russian perspective.
So I'm going to tell you a few words about official position of Russian Ministry of International Relations. So first of all, we have an embassy at Afghanistan today, and it works. We have communication with Taliban, and in April, we have accredited a diplomat from Taliban in Moscow. So we have relations with Taliban, but we don't recognize the regime officially. But in fact, we have it recognized, but not jurisdiction. So we need to communicate with Taliban because Afghanistan is very close to Russia. It has influence in Central Asia, and we have two major threats from Afghanistan. First of all, it's terrorism. The second one is drug traffic. So it's two big problems nowadays for the whole region. It can easily destabilize the situation. And now, we have problems with Ukraine. So if we will have problems with Afghanistan, it will be very horrible. Yeah, our Ministry of Foreign Relations says that we can, in the future, recognize the Taliban regime, but they need to do all the things that they used to promise. But now it's quite difficult to say that Taliban has done everything that it promised. So, and Russia also is interested to communicate with Pakistan, with China, and other regional powers about Taliban regime. And Russia, Pakistan, and China also want USA to give Afghanistan back its money because people in Afghanistan are starving. So it's a really big problem because the major economic source in Afghanistan nowadays is drug business. And people don't have official jobs mostly. They don't have any subsidies from the government. So a lot of farmers, they work at poppy plantations. They are included in drug business, and it's, in some way it's the only way for them to live. Yeah, and also the other problem of drug business is that it gives money for Taliban. They can buy different weapons. They can also drug money also goes to terroristic organizations that are still active at Afghanistan, but the position of Taliban about these terroristic organizations is not very clear, because they say that it's I think in some way it's possible to say that their position more neutral. They say that terroristic organizations are very bad, but they are at their territory. I think it connects with Pushtun Wali. It means that if you are a guest of Pushtun, you are protected by them. But when you go out, you are not anymore protected by them. So this situation with terroristic organizations at Afghanistan territory, it's very dangerous. It can go to Central Asia. It can destabilize Central Asia, and it will be a really big threat to Russia. And also it can go to Iran, to Pakistan, to China, and also destabilize the whole region. So we have a situation of hotspot, but and in every moment it can just bombed, and we will have a collapse. So Russia also wants to communicate with other regional countries, and in the future we can recognize the regime, but Taliban should do a lot of things for it. And other big problem is economy of Afghanistan, because they don't have enough money. They don't have any infrastructure or any legal economics. So it's a very big deal to build economy in this country, and it is very difficult because of the conflict. The country is not still has security problems, because in spring, especially in April, there were several terroristic attacks. For some of them are responsible ISIS, and the other problem is inclusive government, like we called in Russia inclusive government. It means that ethnical minority should participate in the government, but nowadays we can see that there are ethnical minorities in the government, but politically they are talibs. They are not a simple minorities. They are the part of the Taliban. So it's not exactly like talibs have promised. The situation is still unstable, is still unsafe, and In April, also, Taliban said that they would struggle the drug traffic, drug trade, drug business, but we haven't seen now that they have to do something. The drug production is still very high. So, and it's also still destabilizes the region, not only Central Asia, Pakistan, Iran. It's a really big problem for Europe also, and even for in some way for North America. And nowadays, the main deal is also the problem of financing Afghanistan, financial aids for this country, because the country is very poor, and this year the harvest was very, very bad. And Russia also has promised to help Afghanistan with wheat, but Russia wants to sell it, not like aid. Yeah. And Afghanistan nowadays is the problem of the region, not only the problem of one country. And we should all together to deal with problems from Afghanistan. And I think we need to pay a lot of attention, first of all, for terroristic threat from the country. So if the Taliban do something with problem of terrorism and insecurity in the country, it can be recognized by other countries. So I think I have told you all.
Yeah. Thanks, Olga. I'll come back to you with some very interesting and important points you've made. Ambassador Mukhopadhyay, I'll just come to you very quickly now. Ambassador Mukhopadhyay, I had two questions for you, so let me just try and reiterate them before I go to Mandana. For the Iranian perspective, so we were talking about recognition being one thing, return of girls in school being the other thing that has sort of, and correctly so, I think, taken a lot of bandwidth of what we seek of the Taliban. But I think India's engagement, for example, is quite different, right? I think the parameters are different, the requirements are different. So what do you think is going to be, now that India is engaging with the Taliban, what do you think that the Taliban seeks from India, and what does India require from the Taliban to make this relationship somewhat workable at this point of time?
Let me say that, as far as what India expects from the Taliban is much the same as what the world expects from Taliban, which is that the world expects the Taliban to behave more like the rest of the world in terms of rights, in terms of democracy, in terms of inclusivity, in terms of women, in terms of minorities, in terms of basic issues about security, stability, governance, and even values. Now, the fact of the matter is that much of the world that was engaged with Afghanistan has decided, all right, it is not, we cannot pursue this any longer. It's an indefinite commitment. It's not likely to succeed. And they have more or less settled for the bare minimum. Their bare minimum, which is to say, all right, it should be an inclusive government. It shouldn't exclude a good half of Afghanistan, whichever way you look at it, whether you look at it in terms of minorities or women. You can have your Islamic system, but there are certain common values that the whole world adheres to, and I think that should be observed. Now, I think this has been a kind of wishful thinking on the part of the international community as a whole, because the Taliban have never really indicated that they are actually going to ideologically compromise. For various reasons, they may have to make certain compromises, tactical, for reasons of statecraft, for reasons of recognition, legitimacy, perhaps even for financial aid and so on. But even then, if you look at their sort of agenda internally, they have hardened their positions ideologically. They have been as harsh as they have been right from the beginning, if anything harsher towards the armed opposition in particular and towards anyone. They have been as exclusive as they were feared to be. I think I heard a recent comment that in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, even perhaps that that vast majority of the new of the employees are now of one one ethnic composition, and so there is not even any real pretense of inclusivity. They've had problems with even the few elements from the minorities who have been part of the Taliban. Not all of them, but you've heard of problems with one of the Hazara, sort of, you can call him a warlord or whatever, in Balkhab, but also with an Uzbek commander in the past. So, I think the West and the international community as a whole has had different expectations from Afghanistan. Russia's expectation from the Taliban. Russia's expectation is different from the US, is different from India, it's perhaps different from China as well. But in general, everybody has held a very low bar. And at this point of time, not even none of those countries, they haven't even fulfilled the lowest of the low bars in terms of recognition. At the same time, I think the world recognizes that they are a reality. They don't see the opposition prevailing in the very short term. They have virtually an absolute monopoly of force, of coercive power. And for countries like India, you asked about India. For India, Afghanistan is obviously important. It's important historically. It's important strategically. It's important from a security point of view. It's important from the Pakistani angle in terms of Pakistani use of Afghan territory against India. But it's also important from the angle of terrorism and to a lesser extent, as well as drugs. And in particular, it is, even though it is not spoken of much and it's clubbed together with terrorism, there is this fear of dangerous ideologies, extremist ideologies. The Taliban may not themselves be promoting their ideology internationally. They may be satisfied with promoting this internally. But for various reasons, it so happens that there are a dozen, if not 20, extremist organizations of different shades and stripes with different agendas, some country-specific, some sectarian, some anti-India, some more looking towards Central Asia, some towards Iran, and as you know, one of the very important ones looking directly at Pakistan. So the fact of the matter is that they host a vast number of extremist organizations who are hand in glove with each other, who are virtually blood brothers, comrades in the trenches, linked together by codes of honor, codes of war, and codes of Pashtunwali, as Dr. Olga said. So whether or not they themselves promote a kind of international version of Talibanism, the fact is that the countries around the region fear that these extremist currents of various shades and stripes will radiate out and affect and influence. And together with terrorism, their effort is to try and contain and limit that.
Right. Thanks so much. Could I just quickly take this same question to Mandana? India is not technically, well, it is, but a direct neighbor of Afghanistan. But Iran is. And, the Iranian concerns have been quite vocal since the day the Taliban took charge of Kabul. What kind of debates are happening in Iran right now? And what are the expectations? What does Iran want the Taliban to do on security, where it can actually, from the Taliban's perspective, because they plan to be here long term, that they can peacefully coexist with all their neighbors, including Iran?
Actually, Kabir, as you know, Taliban is not a new phenomenon in our region. When the West, especially the United States, decided to support Mujahideen in Afghanistan against the Soviet Union invasion in 1980s, it received welcome by Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, and some other Muslim countries. But it was during 1990s that when Taliban played the role of one of the most important political actors in Afghanistan political scene, and they reached to power in Kabul in 1996. Since that time, Iran, India, and Central Asia, and Russia tried to support the moderate groups in Afghanistan, especially the Northern Front in Mazar Sharif and other provinces in north part of Afghanistan against Taliban, because they believe that the radical definition of Islam introduced by Taliban is not based on Islamic approaches. And then during the republic governments in Afghanistan since 2001 till 2021, for 20 years, again, Iran, India, Central Asia, and Russia followed the same policy by supporting Karzai and Ashraf Ghani's government to try to establish a stable government in Afghanistan, to bring regional security and like this, and development, of course, in Afghanistan. But at the same time, all of these countries began to negotiate with Taliban because they believe that Taliban is a real fact in Afghanistan's political scene, actually. So the negotiation with Taliban group is not a new matter for our countries. Even all of us try to play a role in peace processes, either in Moscow or in Doha or in other parts of the world. Even India and Iran tried to follow new initiatives regarding this matter. And then when the Taliban reached to power in last August 2021, although it was like a shock for some countries, some politicians, even for Afghans, but at the same time, first Iran, then Central Asian countries, recently India began to open the doors again, although we don't expect that Taliban brings peace and security and stability into Afghanistan. But we should think that how we regional powers should negotiate with Taliban and try to find a way that while their interest is provided, but at the same time, we enjoy by a new mechanism of providing security for all the countries in the region. That's all for this part.
Olga, I'll just come to you very quickly. We've seen a lot of talk about how Russia and Russia's interests in Afghanistan sort of work in cohesion with China's interests, because China is increasingly seen as a country that, for some reason, that is going to bail Afghanistan out, right? And you mentioned something very interesting that, getting an economy set up in Afghanistan is an extremely difficult task and always has been. Do you think Russia and China have the both capacity, capability, and the patience to try and build an economic system for Afghanistan together? That is, both Moscow and Beijing.
So it's. I think nowadays today it's impossible because previously Soviet Union have done a lot of for Afghanistan economic and it has infrastructure and different industries in Afghanistan. Afghanistan has a great economic potential because of people sources for different mineral sources in agriculture. But nowadays the global situation is very unstable. Russia has problems. Also, China is very pragmatic, very. And if China doesn't see its income from Afghanistan, it will not do anything for it. And maybe in the future, when the global situation will be more stable, I think Russia, China, and maybe other countries can do something for Afghanistan economy, but Russia and China, it's possible to say that these countries are great powers, but they don't have enough sources nowadays to do something for Afghan economy. But I think some humanitarian aid we will give to Afghanistan. And the major attention is, first of all, treats from this country.
Ambassador, as I was talking earlier, we're talking about the economy part, right? But we haven't seen any movement on that front from the Taliban. They seem to be enjoying their private jet rides, traveling around the world, wherever who was calling them. They're doing all those things. But there is no blueprint. Like, how are they going to pull their own country now that they're in control of it, what they were asking for such a long time? How do you see this affecting the security part? Because you cannot have a very strong security infrastructure beyond a point if there is no economy to sustain the population.
Yeah, thank you, Kabir. Actually, in a way, the answer to this really lies in Taliban 1.0. We have to understand the entire agenda of the Taliban, created by Pakistan in the border areas of Pakistan and Afghanistan, was to create a kind of ideological force that would keep Afghanistan permanently in the Middle Ages. So that, and this is economically as well as ideologically, so that no other country would have an interest in Afghanistan, and only Pakistan would have a kind of captive role in Afghanistan. That is why it suited Pakistan perfectly well the last time around for 5.5 to 6 years, that there were 3 countries who recognized the Taliban. And even in those 3 countries, the 2 other countries that recognized, their work had nothing to do with development. It was the promotion of Islamic charities in that area. So I think we have to understand that the Taliban idea of governance, and I don't say this applies to everyone, and I'm going to say something a little strong and maybe sharp, is their idea of governance, and that by governance I include both political, administrative, and economic, is to impose the Islamic Shariat in the way they see it. And everything is covered by that. It is an inclusive, you can call it a self-contained system. That if you provide Islamic rule, everything else will happen naturally. Economy is not separate from religion. And so I think this is one factor that we have to understand. And it is very difficult for them to grapple. Other than basic issues of administration, how do we distribute weapons and how do we make sure money goes to the right quarters, etc., etc. There is no further idea of governance the way we know it. You asked me a question about why they look at India. They look at India. One of the reasons they look at India is that perhaps, okay, not them, but countries like India may be able to help them provide the kind of economic growth. A second point, a lot of countries have done a lot for Afghanistan. Russia has done in the past. India has done in the past. I would say even the Western intervention has tried to do quite a lot. But none of the international community, in many ways, including us in our 20-year period when we did a lot for Afghanistan, is that we actually did not invest in their economy. And their economy has 2 components. It has a livelihood component, which is all the agri, horti, carpets, rural handicrafts, wool, sheep, etc., as well as the mineral component. The world has known that Afghanistan sits on trillions worth of natural treasures, but nobody has done anything to invest and help Afghanistan stand on its own feet. So it is very natural that the moment Western aid or the West pulls out or the international community pulls out, there is nothing left in the area of economic governance. However hard that the Afghan technocrats and bureaucrats may try under a given circumstance. So I think these 2 points. One is there has been a weakness in the international community's engagement economically with Afghanistan. For example, in 20 years of international investment, nobody tried to develop the trade economy of Afghanistan. link it with the trade markets. India was the biggest market, but let's say the Gulf markets or the Iranian market. The whole world played politics with Afghanistan during this period. And that continues to be the case. So, even basics were not done. And for the Taliban, this is an alien idea. I think we need to first get to that.
Right.
Right. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Mandana, are you there? I'll just ask you one last question, if in case you can hear me.
Yeah, please.
All right. So last question to you before I let you go. Everyone talks about this sort of regional collaboration in dealing with the Taliban and regional collaboration economically or politically dealing with Afghanistan. And this comes from something that Ambassador Mukhopadhyay was just saying, that, everyone has at some level had their field day in Afghanistan. Do you think that, are there any common overlapping interests between Central Asian states, Iran, South Asian countries like India, that, where they can all actually converge and say, yes, we need to work together on this, putting aside everything else, and make sure that A, B, and C is done in Afghanistan and with the Taliban?
Kabir, as we all see nowadays, the world is changing very fast. The new world order is going to be the new international order. It means that different regional and continental powers are going to play more important role. The scene of a struggle between the superpowers has moved from Afghanistan by the withdrawal of international forces from this country to Eastern Europe, the things that we face in Ukraine and its neighboring countries. So it's a good opportunity for Iran, India, Central Asian countries, and Russia to play more important role in Afghanistan, actually. But the matter is that as we face a new international order, we cannot use the previous mechanisms, the previous institutions or organizations like ECO, like SARC, like SCO, Shanghai Cooperation Organization, to solve the problems that its quality is totally new in Afghanistan. So we should think about organizing new mechanisms. We should think to produce new discourses, security discourses, social discourses, and cultural discourses are very important because Taliban is an ideological group. So with the ideological group, you cannot go and deal with them by weapon or by money or like this. You should try to produce a kind of cultural and social discourse to first stop the expansion of this fundamental or extremist ideology, and second, try to negotiate with Taliban based on new mechanisms. So we need more collaboration between Iran, India, and Central Asia, plus a group of Afghan civil activists, Afghan journalists, and Afghan academia, including professors and students, that thousands of them are in India now, are living in Iran and Central Asia. This is a good opportunity to support the civil society in Afghanistan to try to define a new regional society, based on this opportunity that is provided for our countries in this time. And then you can see that we can introduce new initiatives, and based on these new mechanisms and initiatives, negotiate with Taliban and other extremist groups who are in Central Asia, who are in some other countries. Otherwise, we should expect to see that extremism and fundamentalism became much more powerful in Afghanistan and in the region in total.
Great. Thanks, Mandana. Olga, I'll just come to you very quickly with a completely different question. which is, there was a recent tour conducted by General Kurilla of the US in Central Asia, where, as per the reports that, he went, it was a 10-day trip, went to most of the Central Asian capitals. To try and basically portray that, look, Afghanistan and terrorism from Afghanistan still remains the single most fundamental challenge for the Central Asian states. How do you see the US role in this perspective in Central Asia? Because, they have been fairly, comparatively at least, absent for a long period of time. But they're still now trying a newer, I think, an outreach in Central Asia going through Afghanistan, although they've not quantified what exactly threats they are marketing in Central Asia right now out of Afghanistan. But how do you see the US role? Do you see, from a Russian perspective, is US out of it now? They're just done with everything relating to Afghanistan, or there will be a certain level of return from Washington, D.C.'s perspective?
Okay, thank you for your question. It's very interesting. So I don't think that in nearest future we can see USA again in Central Asia and in Afghanistan. First of all, I want to say you that Central Asia is very close region to Russia. And Russia will not be happy to see USA in Central Asia, and what is happening in the world now. US have spent a lot of money in Afghanistan previously, and now the situation in USA with economic is not very good as it used to be. So I think maybe 5, maybe 10 years after, we will not see USA in the region. But maybe they will still have some political interest in this region, and maybe they will try to do something there, but not by their own hands. So maybe they will have some treaties with other regional powers, with Afghanistan also, but they will not be very active at this way. So I think so.
All right, thanks a lot. Ambassador Mukhopadhyay, I'll come to you with the last question of the day. And it's a two-part question. First is, of course, I'll force you to do some crystal ball gazing and let us know what do you see happening in a 12-month period now, right? I think there seems to be, with Ukraine on the side, and Indo-Pacific always is now a priority for the US. Afghanistan seems to be we're dealing with them, but it's not on a priority list anymore. So that's one question. And the second one coming out of that is that, do you think, or do you foresee a fairly messy regional response to the Taliban? Because as I was asking Mandana earlier, that if you step back, there is very little commonalities of interest beyond a point between most of the states, and we have seen that nothing similar to the Northern Alliance has turned up. Everyone is very skeptical of going in again on that front. So on both these two sides, how do you see things panning out?
Right. Thank you again, Kabir. So, the last time the Taliban took over Afghanistan, it took close to 6 years for something to happen. So to ask for a kind of crystal ball for 12 months is actually, well, I'm not sure where it will get. But I think basically the point that we'll see is that we'll see the Taliban hardening, digging their heels, trying to impose their Islamic system. And that this is going to be perceived by the non-Pashtuns as also an imposition of a kind of Pashtun domination. There will be reactions within, and this will be accompanied by a kind of sectarian persecution of the Hazaras. And so you will find a sort of greater and greater resistance coming up, particularly starting in the Tajik areas. but also in the Hazara areas. And to some extent also in the Uzbek areas, though the Uzbek areas Uzbek Taliban are much more closely enmeshed with the IMU and therefore with the Taliban in general. So their sort of integration with the Taliban is much deeper, though there are also Tajik elements engaged with the Taliban. So I think one process that we are going to see is this. Second, in terms of the economy, in terms of humanitarian crisis, in terms of governance, in terms of security, in terms of stability, there is not going to be much improvement. In terms of security, maybe in the cities and maybe the highways are going to be more secure. But one kind of insecurity has been replaced by another kind of insecurity. The insecurity women feel, the insecurity minorities feel, the insecurity that anyone associated in any way with the Republican project will feel, many of whom have gone out. Simultaneously, you will see efforts of the resistance to strengthen itself. But in the 12-month period, I don't see that the resistance is going to be able to gather the momentum to be able to seriously challenge the Taliban, particularly in the areas that it's dominant. But we can expect to see more and more, uprisings, rebellion, resistance in various places in the north and in the northwest. We are not seeing too much in the Pashtun areas of the south, because in general, the feeling in the Pashtun areas is that there's enough of bloodshed and, let's negotiate. The Taliban are amenable to some amount of compromise, and so let's work on that agenda. Last time around, what made the difference, despite Commander Masood's sort of great and epic struggle against them, what really made the difference was an international event which triggered an international intervention. So very likely, again, not likely in the 12 months, but very likely once again, if at all there is a kind of stalemate, or if there is I don't anticipate that resistance will be crushed entirely. This is very much not just a Republican sentiment. It is a struggle for freedom, for basic freedoms for a lot of Afghans. And that spirit of freedom is not going to go. It's going to come out in various forms. Neither side will prevail. An international intervention, once again, may be the one thing that make a difference, and that we cannot predict in a timeline or a schedule. So I think that was your first question. Could you just refresh me once again about your second question, Kabir?
So basically, I was asking that, beyond the sort of just what is going to happen from a prediction point of view, how do you see, do you think that it's going to be from a regional response point of view, right? So when you're talking about centrally,
a messy response. Yeah. So I'm not sure if it's going to be a very messy response as much as it's going to be an incoherent response. As you know, even for the advent of the Taliban, you had different countries pursuing different motives. I think Russia, China, Iran were pursuing one set of motives, which was basically to get the Americans out of the region, get the Americans out of the back, and so on. Pakistan had a different objective, which is to impose the Taliban and once again get tutelage over the country and to be able to use Afghanistan for its strategic objectives, which now it relabels as geoeconomics. And for India, it was to hold on to the Republican regime as far as possible. Now that the change has come, to use whatever capital that we have to keep going some kind of relationship for historical reasons. The government has also mentioned humanitarian aid. But in fact, one should be able to see a much broader engagement, which would include people-to-people assistance, and people-to-people assistance can be deeper without necessarily strengthening the Taliban. And it could also be an engagement with the opposition, and including perhaps the armed opposition, depending upon the way it evolves. And a comprehensive strategy would include these elements, as well as the possibility that Afghanistan may be going in the way in which the ethnic fault lines are going to get sharper and more aggravated. And, we have the Taliban phenomenon and the TTP in Pakistan. And so there could be, tendencies towards Pashtun revanchism. This could have its reactions amongst the non-Pashtuns. And remember, Afghanistan has been a playground for Central Asian, Persian, as well as Pashtun, very briefly, even a subcontinental with Ranjit Singh. So I think these are the basic, so to say, regional tectonics that are playing once again in Afghanistan. And after close to 100 years, you have the possibility of the whole idea of the Afghan nation in many ways being opened up once again. So I think these are basically, yes, from that point of view, it could be very messy. You're right.
Right. Thanks a lot. And we are completely out of time. So I just want to take quickly, thank all our panelists, Mandana Tashar from Iran, Olga Petrofinikova from Russia, and of course, Ambassador Mukhopadhyay from India. It was a great discussion. And I think we're going to have these kind of discussions going forward. Afghanistan, of course, may not be an international issue anymore, but very much remains a regional issue. So thanks everyone for joining in today.
Thank you. Thank you, fellow panelists also.